Hillary Clinton breaking her silence on the Mueller report. Look at this.
It's enough there that any other person who had engaged in those acts would certainly have been indicted. What I thought it was saying is, look, we think he obstructed justice. Here are 11 examples of why we think he obstructed justice, but we're under the control of the Justice Department, and their rule is you can't indict.
But some have said she was actually let off the hook by the Department of Justice from that whole email thing. Former Whitewater independent counsel and former federal prosecutor Robert Ray joins us right now here in Studio F. Good morning to you, Robert.
Good morning.
Is she right? Is that the reason that Mueller found what he did, because there's a DOJ ruling that you can't indict a sitting president?
The report raises a reasonable question about whether or not that was so. That was why the Attorney General, before the report was released to the public, went back to the special counsel, apparently on more than one occasion, as he said in his press conference, to inquire about, let me be sure I understand this. Are you saying? And the answer that came back is, no, that is not what I'm saying. So I know people in some quarters don't want to listen to what the Attorney General actually said, but while that is a reasonable question, Hillary Clinton has it exactly wrong. That is not the reason.
But at the same time, had she not set up that private email server at her house to skirt the State Department rules, she'd probably be president.
I think that there was obviously, as we now know, lots of discussion in the Justice Department about how it was appropriate to resolve that investigation. If you recall, also there was a scathing op-ed piece by the former Attorney General Michael Mukasey shortly before the election, saying he couldn't understand why, under the relevant statutes, the reasons that Jim Comey indicated while a prosecution was not appropriate actually really were department policy. But the bottom line is the exercise of discretion and departmental policy is what Hillary Clinton has to thank for the fact that she wasn't charged with a criminal offense.
You mentioned James Comey. During one of his two infamous press conferences, he said this regarding Hillary Clinton: although there is evidence of potential violations of the statutes regarding the handling of classified information, our judgment is that no reasonable prosecutor would bring such a case. And I know much has been made of that expression, reasonable prosecutor, because a lot of reasonable prosecutors have come out and said, well, I would have done it.
Well, and of course, there was a whole other question, which is at the time that that statement was made, James Comey was not a prosecutor, although he had been one. He was the FBI director. So that was a situation in which you have a currently serving FBI director who formerly was a prosecutor stepping outside his lane to resolve a criminal case, which is a judgment that the department should have made based upon application of department policy. And this is a situation where you have a special counsel who's a former FBI director who's in the position of being special counsel, who has decided that the traditional prosecutorial factors and the exercise of discretion would not be exercised by him, but ultimately had to be exercised by the Attorney General, Bill Barr.
Sure. It is pretty clear with the Mueller report, there was no collusion, no cooperation with the Trump administration, the Trump campaign, and the Russians. The Russians tried, but the Trump people didn't bite.
Not an insignificant finding, by the way.
Well, that's what it was all about. We'd heard that there was Russia collusion. As it turns out, there was not. But then when it comes down to the obstruction stuff, that's more ambiguous. Regarding, it looks like this. Was there intent? We don't know. We're not going to decide.
And Democrats want to ignore the fact that there's ambiguous evidence. And of course, prosecutors deal with ambiguous situations involving making a determination to exercise discretion one way or another in deciding whether or not to bring charges. All of that has, of course, been overlooked, and people look to the report, and Democrats have said, well, obstruction, the evidence there is absolutely clear. I beg to differ. And not only do I beg to differ, which really doesn't matter, the special counsel himself indicated that he begs to differ. I mean, in his own words, the words that were quoted before the report was released by the Attorney General, the obstruction piece presents difficult questions of law and fact, and I might also add policy as well. And discretion in that sense has been exercised both by the special counsel and later by the Attorney General, all of which Hillary Clinton has, in effect, ignored, notwithstanding the fact that she's been the beneficiary of that prosecutorial discretion several times, not only in connection with the email investigation, but going back to my own investigation, sure, Whitewater, and the firing of the travel office employees, where I made the judgment based upon the exercise of discretion that a properly instructed jury that would be evaluating a case, sure, like this probably would not convict, and therefore I exercised my discretion not to prosecute her.
Few know this subject better than you. Robert Ray, a real pleasure having you.
Yeah, nice to be with you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
If you're innocent of the underlying crime, then everything they're talking about is an effort for him to defend himself. So if I tell somebody that I'm innocent, please testify on my behalf and say what happened. Am I obstructing justice, or am I defending myself and serving justice?
Rudy Giuliani there telling Fox and Friends this morning Democrats have no case for obstruction of justice against President Trump. As we await the president to leave the White House, it could be happening just a short time from now, and head to Atlanta for an opioid abuse summit this afternoon. We could hear from him on the fight with House Democrats over subpoenas for some former top White House aides. But first, we speak with Kellyanne Conway at the White House. Kellyanne, good morning to you.
Good morning, Sandra.
So how far does the president plan to go to fight this request?
He gave an interview to the Washington Post where he made very clear that there's really no reason to comply with all of these requests when we have the Mueller investigation. We have already spent $30 million plus of taxpayer dollars in 22 months and 2,800 subpoenas, 500 witnesses, a million pieces of documentation to try to get to the bottom of this, and indeed Director Mueller did. I believe too many people are invested in this investigation, and they had a conclusion in search of evidence, and they're disappointed in Director Mueller harassing he and his wife as they're leaving Easter services, who really wanted a different result. But that's not the way our justice system works, and that's not the way prosecutions and investigations work. This was very simply, when you prosecute and you investigate, you either refer for indictment or you decline to refer for indictment. The rest, frankly, is a little bit gratuitous for some who are still looking and searching for a way to get the president. I also believe, Sandra, that people are right in this country to look at the Mueller investigation as the definitive, conclusive, nonpartisan, taxpayer-funded investigation that in the actual Mueller report makes clear the executive branch, the president himself, never interfered, never impeded, never obstructed that investigation. In fact, made available all these people from the White House and from his campaign,
but as you know,
all the documentation.
That's not stopping Democrats from wanting more.
Well, it's going to cost them. It's going to cost them precious political currency.
What is it going to cost them? Is the president willing to use executive privilege here?
Possibly. And I will tell you something, that this president, I think the Democrats have a decision to make. Are you going to talk for the rest of 2019 into 2020 about impeachment or infrastructure? About drug pricing or dragging down a president? About health care or Donald Trump? Trump at all times. They have to be honest with the people of this country whom they also represent as to whether they are serious about having bipartisan action to try to solve the problems of this nation. Look where the president and the first lady are going today, to this RX summit in Atlanta, where all the stakeholders and decision makers and practitioners gather once a year. This president and the First Lady have worked together to combat the opiate crisis, including in a bipartisan piece of legislation last year, the largest amount of funding, the largest single action legislatively on any drug crisis in our nation's history. The president did that with every single Democratic vote. So he's ready to keep doing that on infrastructure, on drug pricing, on health care.
And I know he's got a big day coming up on that. I just want to run a couple things past you. Here's what Hillary Clinton is saying on the Mueller report. Let's listen to this first.
I think there's enough there that any other person who had engaged in those acts would certainly have been indicted. The whole matter of obstruction was very directly sent to the Congress.
I know there's a lot of folks crying hypocrisy there, and I know you're going to have reaction to that, but we need to know if executive privilege is on the table for the president at this point.
Executive privilege, of course, is on the table for the president at this point. But that's not what she was talking about. What she said, apart from being irrelevant and partisan, is just wrong. That anybody else would have been indicted. The Mueller report did not indict the president. Mueller did not indict the president. There was enormous pressure on the Mueller investigation and investigators to do what she failed to do, which is deny Donald Trump the presidency. And this woman has always blamed everybody but her, the pathetic candidate and poor campaign, that she ran and was. It's Jim Comey's fault, it's Russia's fault, it's Donald Trump's fault, it's Wisconsin's fault. And it's, apart from that, if she wants the entire Mueller report to make its way into the public, let's have at it, because I understood in the news accounts yesterday that part of the redactions include her husband and Monica Lewinsky. I didn't put it in the Mueller report. That's a 20-year-old episode. But it's actually, I understand through news accounts, in part of the redacted portions of the Mueller report, of all things. And she's got some experience on impeachment because her husband actually was impeached by the House of Representatives. But he was impeached because he lied under oath on August 17th, 1998 to investigators.
Always such limited time, and I have a lot to get to. And I want to talk about what the president has coming up today. But first, I want to ask you about Joe Biden. He is expected to enter the race this week. What does the president think about a potential contest against Joe Biden?
Bring it on. Bring them all on. I think Biden's timing actually benefited him. If somebody who's been critical about, will you, won't you, the poorest sort of rollout for a non-candidate, because he kept flubbing and kept stepping all over himself, and he had to put out the video about hugging and sniffing women's hair, etc. I think Biden's timing actually benefits him because the Democrats seem really desperate to find an alternative to Bernie Sanders, who's the clear announced frontrunner right now in the polling and on the ground. Bernie Sanders has a lot in common with Donald Trump, which is he doesn't really care what his party thinks about his candidacy at this point in the primaries. He's connecting directly with the voters. He's raising small dollar amounts. The only difference between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump is Bernie Sanders' ideas are terrible for America, and Donald Trump was a much better candidate, had connective tissue with the people. And so I think Biden will be seen as the alternative to Bernie Sanders, but he's got a lot of people in his way. And look, old, white, male career politicians like Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden is not exactly what the Democratic Party had in mind for 2020 when they're running all these different folks who are talking about identity politics and what makes them different. And the women are complaining too. I see women on TV complaining about the female candidates aren't covered the same. That's just hogwash. They just have terrible ideas. Nobody wants a government takeover of health care.
Coming up. I want to ask you about the day, though. I know that fighting opioid abuse is something that you have taken on and spent a lot of time on in the White House. The president joins you today. He's about to depart. What is today all about, Kellyanne?
So the RX Summit is the annual gathering of practitioners and stakeholders and decision makers to break the back of this opioid crisis and heroin, meth, all the different drugs that are coming through. This president has had a whole of government approach on the whole person. And we've got, I think today will be a progress report of sorts. Other presidents and other principals have addressed the summit, but no one has ever been able to go there and talk about the progress. We have a reduction in first prescriptions of over 30% in just the last year plus. We have more people in this country, particularly tweens and teens, in treatment than ever before. That H.R. 6, that legislation last year, secured record amounts of funding and a lot of the drug-free community grants, $90 million last year, $6 billion in funding through H.R. 6. We are getting more people into treatment and into recovery. And when they come out, Sandra, we're trying to treat the whole person, help connect them with a job, help connect them with housing, help connect them with reskilling and workforce opportunities. The First Lady's been on the front lines, too, through her Be Best platform, helping those neonatal abstinence syndrome babies who are born chemically dependent.
I know it's a huge effort on the part of the White House, and I know that you've been spending a lot of time on that, Kellyanne. We appreciate your time this morning, and we anticipate the president's departure a short time from now. Thank you.
Thank you.